I finished my evaluation of the Week 3 discussion questions, at least those associated with the annotated bibliography. Just wanted to quickly review some of the responses to those discussion questions, and then some of the things to keep in mind as you work at putting the finishing touches on this annotated bibliography. I'm going to briefly go through the rubric for that assignment as well. So discussion question number 13, which was due, of course, on Week 3, Day 1, which is Monday. I wanted you to identify some of the challenges you see in developing an annotated bibliography. And of course, one of those challenges is you may not be familiar with this kind of assignment. You may have completed bibliographies before, but not done the annotation part of that. And so that can be a challenge, and many of you had identified that. As I mentioned in some of my feedback, it's important to, of course, use the videos like this video, the preview to the assignment, that particular video, and then, of course, assignment sheet to make sure that you're covering all the parts. In many ways, this assignment, as I mentioned in that video, that preview video, is an exercise in just completing and being thorough in completing each of the parts of that annotated bibliography. And we'll get to that in a second as I look at the rubric. And then in the second discussion question for the week, I asked you to look at, of course, the library site. I want you to get familiar with this library site, not only for English 111, which of course is going to help you with your research paper and your annotated bibliography and other things, but I also want you to get familiar with it so you can use it for other classes as well, because it can be very helpful. And so what I did is ask you to identify one source that you might use in your paper. So it could be one of the sources that you're developing for the annotated bibliography, and evaluate that source. Now, some students did not identify the specific source, so be sure as you're responding to the discussion question that you're answering it completely. So identify a particular source and then evaluate it concerning the criteria. Many of you identified some very important things to keep in mind. One, of course, the author's credentials, the publisher's credentials, the relevance of the source, the timeliness of the source, all good things to consider as you determine how an effective source to use and to include in that annotated bibliography. And then lastly, for the third discussion question, what I asked you to do is identify a couple of databases as well that you might use as part of this to do your research. Most of you did a good job, but again, some of you didn't identify databases. You went through the research process and what you would consider, but didn't actually jump in and identify databases. So you can look at fellow students' responses, those who did, get an idea what some of those databases are that students are using. So just be sure as you respond again to discussion questions that you're doing that thoroughly and considering those questions, reading those carefully as you respond. Now, the primary reason that we have you do this course is annotated bibliography, and I mentioned this in the assignment sheet and in the preview video as well, is that it's very important to be able to efficiently and effectively find good sources. Now, you can do Google searches and get thousands and thousands of responses, but what that requires requires you to do is to sort through that information and find the good sources. So you have to do a lot more sorting when you're using a site like Google than you do when you're using a site like the Consortium Library, where you can identify particular criteria that you want to use. So you can check peer-reviewed journals on the database searches, and then what will happen is they only give you sites or information that are peer-reviewed, and so you can, after you have developed the skills in kind of navigating the site, you can find information much more quickly, do your research much more quickly and efficiently, and as a result your writing process becomes more efficient and it becomes more effective because you're finding better sources quickly. It's not just good enough to find sources. It's easy to find sources. Any Google search will give you sources. What you need to do is find good, credible sources that support the observations you're making. That's the mark of good writing, and that's the practice that you're essentially doing and starting to develop, the skills you're starting to develop as you develop this annotated bibliography. And so, as I just want to highlight some key points to keep in mind as you develop this. One thing that I often see as a shortcoming in many student responses to the annotated bibliography is they aren't thorough in covering all the necessary parts of the annotated bibliography. So there's three major sections, again, as I mentioned in the preview video: the introduction, the annotations, and the conclusion. I've highlighted those in the rubric. So the introduction essentially states a topic of research, offers a brief overview of what has been learned so far on this topic and what you hope to discover through continued research. The main part of this annotated bibliography is, of course, the annotations, the citations themselves. So you need at least 8 sources. Again, with these, I've already went over this, so I'm not going to go through this in too much depth. But these different types of sources. And again, each annotation includes a sentence or two about the rhetorical context of the source. That is it a magazine? Is it a peer-reviewed journal? Is it a newspaper article, and so forth? Identifies the intended audience, a brief summary of the content, what it's about, and a note about why this source is helpful to your, valuable to your answer, or essentially addressing your research question, and an explanation of how you might use it. And then the source are cited correctly according to APA style. And of course, the book has a lot of information on APA style and how to cite sources. That's the primer. That'll be the biggest chunk of the annotated bibliography. And then lastly, the conclusion explains what you've learned regarding locating appropriate materials, assessing reliability of sources, your subject, etc. And then the bibliography is correctly formatted. And so you want to include all those 3 parts. You can have a heading for introduction, a heading for annotations, and then a heading for conclusion. Again, double space throughout. Again, look at citation information. You'll have your citation at the beginning and then the annotated information, which is this part here. And so again, this is a process of kind of putting the pieces in place, being thorough about doing that. Of course, I'll be giving you feedback that you can use to improve your work for that final portfolio, but you really want to develop the skill in identifying sources, locating sources, and evaluating sources. And that's, of course, what this assignment is all about. And this might be, for those who struggle with the research paper, who struggle with the writing, this can be a fun part of that process, particularly with a topic that you're interested in and engaged in. So if you have questions along the way, let me know, but good luck as you put the finishing touches on this annotated bibliography.